Yeah, we're going to be talking about stablecoins today, about most importantly, the censorship problem. We're going to touch on themes like freedom to transact and remember a bit, what is it that we're doing here? Because we're not building some funny looking farms for institutional actors or other things that are not mattering. Initially, we had a bit of a project in crypto, and I like to remember, not forget about it, and try to have other people remembering. So elephant and is even more of a mammoth because it's been here for a while now, since DeFi exists. But you have the number on screen, it's pretty straightforward, and it's a generous assumption. But in the current state of play, 99.93% of the stablecoins can be censored, frozen, destroyed. Essentially, if you use those stablecoins, and if a government or a large-scale private actor wants you to not use them, they will find a way to make it happen. The lovers are here. So yeah, it's a bit key to our space, right? And the first reflex people will have is, hey, yes, but you have ETH and Bitcoin, and those are not censorable. So people can use that if they're worried about the censorship, blah, blah, blah. Which is a nice story to put the kids to bed at night, but it doesn't hold, you know, because people in the real world, they don't transact in Bitcoin, they don't transact in Ether. We've established that half a decade ago already. They transact in stablecoin. If you are paying wages, if you're buying a product, any kind of actual economic utility tied transaction happens in a stablecoin. And again, you go back to this figure of most of the stablecoin not being able to resist this censorship. So to be a bit more precise, ooh, can you see the screen well? I hope so. It's okay. A bit more precise is essentially you have, so on Pharos we track about 240 stablecoin. This gives you the distribution of their censorship capabilities. So essentially 133 are a direct yes, meaning the contract of these stablecoins include a blacklist, a freeze, a destroy feature, and through action by the emitting entity, the circle, the tether, and so on, they can blacklist, freeze, and censor you. You have a bit of a middle belly, the yellow and orange, which are those DeFi stablecoins, but they, of course, in Pharos, they are essentially what we created a category for them we call CeFi dependent, which we find more informative, because essentially you have two issues, okay? The yellow is more or less your thing is clean, but I can't trust you because your contract can be changed. So you don't have a blacklist or a freeze feature now, but it's totally possible that I wake up tomorrow and know you have one. The orange is a bit different. It's typically, for instance, a first die situation, which is you did a good job, your infrastructure is beautiful, it's amazing, decentralized, you have a DAO, they vote, we like it. But what goes in your stablecoin, the collateral, is mostly made of censorable assets, and therefore I don't care that you don't have freeze function. You can be just censored through upstream. So that's this upstream orange category. And you're left with 15 to 16, depending on how generous you count, stablecoins that are explicit no. They cannot be frozen or blacklisted. So yeah, I was one slide ahead. This is pretty much a detail, and you have the figure per category. But you really need to realize the scale, right? So roughly 330 billion stablecoin. That's the market. 300 billion and 306 billion explicit yes, issuer can freeze. Then another 16 billion possible. So again, contract can be changed, it can happen. Then another 20-ish billion upstream. Die type situation. It can happen just going through the collateral. And you're left with 200 million explicit no. That's kind of where it comes from. The problem is an explicit no takes all of those three conditions together, right? So first one is quite obvious, but an explicit no takes that there is no freeze, blacklist, or cease function in the contract of the stablecoin. But it also takes immutable code, because else we go back in the possible problem, right? Maybe you don't have a freeze function today, but I wake up tomorrow, there is an update, and now there is a freeze function. And the third point is to address this upstream situation. Not only you need to have no freeze function and an immutable code, but you also need to have an infrastructure that does not depend on collateral that can be censored. So, I don't know, it might seem a bit of a purist discussion so far, right? Why does this dude care so much about his stablecoins not being censorable? I would say it's quite the opposite, actually. If you have even a minimal amount of curiosity for the world and you're watching what's happening everywhere right now, you would understand that I'm talking about something like utterly fundamental. Like, I don't care what's happening in the political Muppet show of your country. That is not significant. This is. Because if you look at, again, recent examples, like, the truckers' protest in Canada a few years back, where they censored their bank account, because the guys were carrying a political project that the government did not approve of. They didn't ban the movement. They didn't make being a trucker illegal. They just cut the funding because they have access to the whole financial infrastructure. And those guys were dependent on it. So again, to put it another way, freedom of association, cute, useless. Freedom of religion, cute, useless. All of these are downstream of another freedom, the freedom to transact. If you don't have this one, you are so easy to play. You are like toys for your government if you don't have this one. Because, I don't know, the ecological guys are getting a bit heated up, and they're doing all these protests and blah, 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 we don't like this so much, we want to keep polluting. Well, what are they going to do? They're going to make it illegal to fund you now because you're a terrorist organization, or I don't know what, they're going to cut the access to you. And then they don't even have to ban the project that you're carrying. They just cut the funding. To put it another way, in the world that we live in, where money governs and decides everything, whether we like it or not, it's a logical conclusion to understand that the freedom to transact is then the mother of all freedom. And I'm not necessarily happy saying that. I would love a world where we're more balanced and we look at things through another lens and money is not dominating everything. But I'm also a pragmatist. So that's why this topic is extremely important for me. Those are just some numbers in case you want to have an idea of the actual amount of censorship happening. So about 4.7 billion is the total, but you can see the trend, right? Most bullish chart of all crypto right there. Except we don't really like to see that going up. And the situation needs to be factored with what's happening more broadly in the stablecoin market, right? Because right now I'm talking about entities that can censor you, but you might be thinking, okay, you also told us there is 240 stablecoins, so is that so much of a problem? Because maybe Circle doesn't like me and censor me, but I will use Tether, and if Tether does the same, I will use whatever, ESNA, and then I can hop through providers. No, as simple as that, because again, you have this. 80% of the market is two stablecoins, right? You can see on the chart below, I don't know if you see well, but the little gray part you have on top is all the others. So the 240 stablecoins, and everything that is below the gray is essentially USDC, USDT, and DAI USDS. So you have a very concentrated market over a few centralized actors that essentially become the gatekeeper in that new system. Another point potentially of little hope is that you do have diversification of the providers of stablecoins and of the currencies they're pegged to. So you're seeing more and more stablecoin in Asia, in South America, and so on. And of course, they respond to different regulatory bodies, to different regulations. So potentially, it creates some, let's say, arbitrage opportunity for the holders of stablecoins to resist this censorship. But it's still not sufficient. So, yeah, this is what I do. This is what I worry about. I want the whole world to use stablecoin and to do DeFi, but I don't want them to do DeFi in a Googleized version that they will have on their phone where everything is trusted and essentially they are at the mercy of the government. I am, as far as you might have understood, more aligned with the early punk vibes that crypto is the best tool we ever created to resist governmental oppression. And now we are at a critical time where essentially, we are at the shift we had in the 90s with the internet. The 90s internet was true to its original principles and vision, And then the 2010 internet became the Facebook, Amazon, Google megaslop factory that we all know of, with the trade-off that came on population control, financial control, freedom of thoughts, and essentially the whole techno-capitalist modern apparatus. So now, how do we prevent that from happening in crypto? We need to defend that freedom to transact enforced by immutable decentralized stablecoins. It's as simple as that. So I tried to do my part in two ways. I showed you some data from Pharos. It's a stablecoin analytics platform, giving you tons of insight on the whole market. And I'm also contributing to a project called Polaris, building a decentralized stablecoin that can scale and cover essentially all fiat currencies. So for Pharos, I don't know, yeah, I'm a bit short on time, so I'll go a bit quickly. Let me show you actually, if we have a minute, that could be fun. It's a bit more interactive than usual. So Pharos has a ton of things, and lately I got even to the point that I decided to bring them to life. So what you will find here is a kind of world visualization, right? Where every stablecoin is a ship, every harbor is a chain, the zone in the water are like stress signal on the stablecoin. So you will find this corner right there. It's kind of like the alert corner. So those that have stressful situations on their peg are hanging over there. And yeah, it allows you to navigate the Pharos data in a bit more playful way. But Pharos is also a very serious dashboard you can just use to get a comprehensive overview of the state of the stable market, including, to the topic of today, discussions of censorability and blacklisting. So the tracking, extremely detailed tracking of all the freezing, seizing events that happens on stablecoin, on about 30 stablecoins right now. And yeah, this total figure. Up. But let me use my few minutes that I have left to tell you maybe more about the alternative, right? So the problem, Pharos measures the problem, but how do we solve this concretely? Remember that the current state is about $200 million worth of stablecoins against a 333 billion base that are explicitly resistant to censorship. So you have a question of essentially establishing a stablecoin model that can explore a path completely different from what has been done before, because the before is essentially maximally centralized and scaled, or decentralized and censorship resistant, but niche. So this is the effort we've been taking on at Polaris since 2 years now, to come up with a new model to build and scale decentralized stablecoin. It's much bigger than a stablecoin project itself, actually. We had to think about the collateral itself and how to turn ETH into a yield-bearing asset, but without relying and creating a dependency on staking. So there is a bonding curve involved with this base collateral. There is a CDP model to emit stablecoin that is generalizable to cover other currencies than USD. And we had to give it some thoughts too about governance, which is not governance because the core is immutable, but there is still some levers that can be adjusted to adapt the protocol to changing situations. So yeah, the vision is to essentially establish a new dual infrastructure on ETH, right? First, the yield layer with this Polaris ETH, PETH, competitive to staking with a completely different risk model, because now you have a bonding curve-backed asset, meaning massive liquidity at scale, that scale with the size of the asset itself. So you've heard a few talks today about those problems of pricing, of the oracle on the liquid stake tokens and things like that. The liquidity on the stake token is a real question, and it's not as good as we like to think it is, especially if you start comparing it to the size of those tokens, the size they have reached. There is also questions about the staking on Ethereum long term, right? Does it make sense that we're spending so much on staking? Does it make sense that 35% of the ETH in existence are staked? Do we need so much? All of those discussions are happening, but essentially the staking landscape is gonna evolve. That's quite apparent now, and probably evolve towards compressed yield and towards less insane Ponzinomics on top of the stake tokens, right? The restaking and all those funny games we played for a few years were all cute, but they don't deliver tangible economic value. They still haven't really found product market fit. So maybe it's time we actually mature as a space into an asset that is a bit more of institutional grade in a way. So that's for the ease part. On the stablecoin themselves, it's similar. There are questions of, we talked about the decentralized core, immutable code, providing maximal guarantees to the user. That's cute, that's technical. But it also needs to actually do its job as a stablecoin, meaning keep its peg, be able to scale, and offer competitive terms for users, both on the borrow side and on the earn side. So yeah, the best way, if you're curious about this, is simply to try out the testnet. We just launched it 2 days ago. So you'll find it on the website. I put it at the end, polarisfinance.io. Yeah, I'm trying to keep some time for the questions. I know some of the things I said might have been a bit frontal. That's my way of doing things. I don't like to beat around the bush. If we're honest about it, I've been doing DeFi 7 years, so I don't care. Like, I really don't care. You can't fire me. I'm made. I don't have anyone to please. I'm doing what I believe in. And in the stage we are in, I'm not far from considering the whole industry from a massive waste. Simply because, what we've built is interesting. It's innovative. But again, it's poisoned at the very core because of this, right? If you don't have a kind of visceral reaction when I literally just told you 0.06% of what's happening in DeFi is upholding to what we tried to build in the first place. The rest is essentially traditional finance cosplaying as DeFi. For me, that makes me mad. That makes me want to break things, But I try to channel this into something a bit more constructive. Okay, maybe the problem is we didn't do good enough on those decentralized stablecoins. Maybe there are other questions at play. And that's why I'm doing what I do. But I think it's really like, it's not a question we can keep sleeping on, because the more we sleep on it, the more brutal the slap back to reality is going to be. And I'm not sure the space can survive the slap back to reality if it happens, in a major way. What if at some point a state-level actor that is not North Korea trying to pull little hacks and make some pocket money, but a state-level actor actually try to destroy DeFi, not make money out of DeFi, but destroy DeFi. Current DeFi doesn't resist that. We need to be aware of it. It doesn't for a second. Probably it's a few hours event to explode the whole DeFi if you're the United States of America and that is your project. So let's make their game a bit harder, shall we, right? Because I'm not here to give them candies and gifts like that. I don't think this industry should be so vulnerable and exposed. So yeah, Pharos Watch to get a sense of what's happening on the stablecoin, who is censorable, who is not, risk analysis, tons of things. Polaris to get a glimpse of what can be done with those decentralized stablecoins, how do we actually scale them while keeping them censorship resistant and true to the original DeFi ethos. Yeah, we have 5 minutes for questions if you have some. You guys have a microphone?
Technically, when Tether freezes funds, what happens on the blockchain? You cannot move the funds, or what happens? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. The answer is a total mess because I'm doing this blacklist tracker on Pharos, so I'm literally monitoring those contracts and those events. It depends a lot compared to the providers. They all have different processes. But you have like 3 main actions they can do. What we call the freeze is simply the owner of the assets cannot move them. As simple as that. There is destroy, which for some stablecoins will happen after they freeze you. For some, it's immediate, which is, as the name would suggest, the assets are actually destroyed. And then they could be unblacklist or unfreeze when they are freeing the assets that were frozen. But yeah, the situations are really like different. We keep seeing new ways to censor. So if you followed the RSC's Arbitrum situation, you've seen what the Arbitrum Security Council has done, which is something else. It's not freezing, it's not destroyed, it's not blacklist, right? They posted a transaction on behalf of the owner wallet to send the funds somewhere. So you could call this a forced send, because the owner did not sign that. But essentially, different ways, same result. You're not fully in control of your assets. Someone else, an entity, can operate them, destroy them, seize them from you.
What did you learn from MakerDAO's kind of journey?
Do you have an hour? Or two? A lot. So I was extremely, Maker was one of the projects that, I'm DeFi early class, so my staples then were Maker, Uniswap, Bancor. There wasn't much to do, but they were pretty exciting. Maker especially, I love this concept of in the early vibe, you have to be honest, the project felt like we were building our own central bank, but crypto version, proper, fair, and transparent, It really felt like the logical extension of, Bitcoin tried to do what it's trying to do, but it's not very useful to transact or to do finance. Then Ethereum come along, then we have DeFi, and then we have the central bank of DeFi that emerged in a way. So the early days were very exciting. The infrastructure of the protocol itself is very elegant, but essentially the choice that were made by governance over the years made the protocol quite uninteresting to my eyes in the present day. So it was a bit of a case of a progressive degradation of the collateral, which is a pattern now. You see more and more on the stablecoins, right? If you were for Engineers Talk just half an hour ago, he was telling you about how ESNA started as a basis trade-backed coin and then evolved into something else. And most people didn't realize. So I think that's something a bit similar with Maker. There was the addition of the USDC PSM, more and more real-world asset, then the transition to USDS, which is interesting, by the way, because DAI in our blacklist categorization is an upstream blacklist stablecoin, meaning there is USDC, there is also centralized asset in reserve. This way you can censor DAI. USDS became worse, so the next version of DAI, because no USDS is a possible, right? And it's the most explicit case of possible ever recorded on Pharos. Because essentially there is a function in the contract. It's already there. It's not active now. It takes one governance vote to activate it that will define the address that can then trigger the function and stand guard, you're blacklisted from USDS. You're blacklisted. There's just a flip to switch to enable that blacklisting. So yeah, lots of hopes initially, and then delusion. Story of Maker is still interesting to read, but this is not where you will find what we're looking for here. Why did they do what they did? Growth, scale. They took the easy path. You have to understand that the model that I described for stablecoin is not the quickest path to growth. It's a kind of a situation of short-term incentive versus long-term, right? If you want the most growth short-term, then your playbook is clear. You take some real-world assets, you do all those things, you centralize. That's how you get your growth. And look at the recent trajectory on the big stablecoin. This is what they did. What I'm thinking deeply is so that if you want long-term TVL retention, this is not how you will get it. You will get it by building it slowly but surely over time, by offering something that the others cannot match and replicate this easily. So that's kind of, that's a startup mentality, right? People are copying what works, but they don't understand that doing that has zero defensibility, right? because then the next guy is going to copy what works and so on. Versus actually building a decentralized stablecoin, people are going to have a hard time stealing your thunder. The only way they can do it is by competing on the same vertical. But from what we see now, there is literally no team capable or willing. Again, we're talking 16 stablecoins that match these conditions of Pharos. Those 16 are pretty much all of them fork of liquidity, either V1 or V2. So essentially, you have one team in the whole history of DeFi that was, pick the words, right? Is a competent, quite obviously, stablecoin is still alive after 5 years, willing, and that did it. The other teams, I don't know, maybe they don't have the skills, maybe their focus is somewhere else, maybe they have another vision for the space. But yeah, I think that's how we get the current situation. Do we have time for more?
I think we're waiting for the next speaker, so I think, yeah, one more.
Okay.